Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Metabolism and Menopause podcast. My name is Stephanie, and I'm your host and CEO of Vitality OET. We are a women's nutrition, health, and fitness company that focuses predominantly on women's hormones, particularly as they start going through peri-menopause and onwards. We know that you start experiencing so many changes in this time of your life, whether it be hot flashes, night sweats, irritability, brain fog, or weight gain around the middle that seems to have come out of absolutely nowhere despite you not changing anything. So you go back to those tried and true methods of cutting calories, cutting carbs, doing a bunch of cardio, yet it feels like nothing is working. You're putting in all this effort and it feels like you're actually moving backwards. But we know now that your body is inherently different now that you've gone through these hormonal changes. So our mission here at Vitality is to really help you understand how your body changes in this time of your life so you can reach those health and fitness goals, feel in control and at home in your body again, live a life full of vitality, and really understand how to take care of this new body of yours. So today I have the wonderful Coach Chelsey on. We are going to be talking all about hunger hormones because obviously those are going to impact your ability to lose weight, your appetite, your cravings, things like that. And shockingly, but not so shockingly, we know that there are going to be a lot of changes that come with the hormonal changes that we see during perimenopause and menopause, which come as no surprise if you've been listening to this podcast, that those hormones influence so many things in our body. So we're going to talk a little bit about like hunger and fullness signaling, the way they can become disrupted, how to improve them, most importantly, and how to support those. So what we're going to talk about first is discussing what those hormones are. The hormones that play that role in our hunger, because we need to understand that first so then we can talk about how they change and then how to improve them. There are so many systems in place in our body to send signals that impact our hunger and our fullness and our appetite. We often hear a lot about leptin and ghrelin, which do play a very essential role in our hunger and fullness cues, but there are actually way more hormones and neurotransmitters that also are going to impact this. So it's not just those two, which is what most of us think. So we're going to look at some of the ones that are the most involved in this process because there is quite a few. So we're going to see that a lot of them are going to impact all these things that we're talking about today. So we're going to start off a little bit sciencey. I'd like to always make sure that we give you lots of education at the beginning. Then we'll give you the doom and gloom as to what happens during perimenopause and menopause, and then give you the positives of, hey, you can actually fix this, and here are the steps to do so. So I will let Chelsey take it away with the first one, which is leptin, probably the one that you've heard about the most.
Yes, absolutely. So leptin is a satiety or fullness hormone. It is released by our fat cells called adipocytes to help regulate our energy expenditure. When our fat stores are adequate, our leptin levels will rise, sending the signal to the brain to suppress appetite. Leptin can make it through our blood-brain barrier and sends messages to the hypothalamus, which is a part of our brain. It tells our brain whether we are full or hungry. When we have an increased amount of fat cells, it can lead to an increased levels of leptin, which can initially actually reduce hunger. Leptin levels can be impacted by both high calorie deficit or high calorie diets and low calorie diets. And the level of leptin in your blood is directly related to how much body fat you have. Leptin also plays a role in energy regulation when the body is working correctly. It can influence how the body uses energy. When our leptin levels are high, it encourages the body to burn fat for energy. This process is called lipolysis. It signals the brain that the body can afford to use its stored fat. When leptin levels are low, the body conserves energy and reduces fat burning, prompting the brain to encourage food intake. And we'll learn a little bit more down below about what can go wrong with leptin and how those hunger and satiety signals can be disrupted.
Yeah, so with leptin in particular, like we know, so like just to kind of summarize that, is it tells you when you're full, it tells you when you're hungry. It also, if you have enough of it, is going to give you enough energy. It's going to allow your body to burn body fat. If it's low, you're going to be more hungry, and your body's also going to store fat. So it's very important. Leptin, when it's high, tells you that you're full. It's going to help you with your appetite, and it's going to burn fat. When it's low, we are going to see that your body stores fat, and you are going to have more hunger. Okay, so you can see how Together, that kind of sucks if your leptin is low, right? So let's just keep that little nugget in there for later when we touch back on this again. The next hormone is our ghrelin. This is our hunger hormone. It's the opposite function of leptin, right? Because leptin tells us when we are full. Ghrelin tells us that we are hungry. So it's going to stimulate our appetite, which is obviously going to then influence us into wanting to eat more and promote fat storage. So ghrelin is released from the empty stomach cells and stimulates your appetite as a response to hunger and starvation. Ghrelin production stops once your stomach is stretched with sufficient food. So those receptors stretch and it's like, okay, now we're full. You got enough food in there. We're good to go. So then you will not be hungry anymore, right? One thing to know is that simple carbs, so not all carbs, high sugar carbs, we're talking about the chips, the chocolate, the candy. We're not talking about potatoes. We're not talking about rice. We're not talking about quinoa. We're not even talking about whole grain breads. We are talking about your quote unquote highly processed junk style foods. They will not stretch the stomach lining, meaning you can eat a whole lot of them and not feel full. This is why when you eat a baked potato, you probably feel full partway through. This is why you can sit and crush a family-sized bag of chips if you really wanted to, and you would still not feel full. Maybe sick, but you won't feel full. So that's something to be important to note here. And then high fiber and high protein do stretch the stomach. So this is why we want to make sure that we're eating enough carbohydrates that are higher in fiber. So everything I listed, your fruits, your veggies, potatoes, rice, quinoa, oats, whole grains, beans, all those things are going to stretch the stomach as well as protein, which is why they help you feel full. And then your hunger isn't as high, right? We also know that the ghrelin levels are going to affect the leptin levels that Chelsey just talked about. So the ones that tell us that we are, that we're full, right? So ghrelin also plays a role in maintaining our glucose and energy homeostasis. Ghrelin also plays a role in stimulating the release of growth hormone, which we know during perimenopause and menopause, it's really hard to build and maintain muscle mass. So ghrelin is important to have enough levels of so that we can produce growth hormone to help support our muscle mass that we lose when estrogen decreases. People who are classified as obese tend to have a really poor signaling of ghrelin in the brain, which can lead to an increase in food intake because you don't feel full. So as we mentioned earlier, ghrelin producing cells are produced in the stomach, right, when it stretches, but they can also be found in our small intestine, our colon, our pancreas, kidneys, even the placenta. So kind of to summarize those two together is like leptin helps us feel full. Ghrelin is what tells us that we're hungry. So ghrelin, small stomach, it's empty. It's going to be, okay, we need to eat. Leptin is going to tell us, okay, we're done eating, right? So they work in conjunction together. And if you don't have enough of your ghrelin, it's going to affect our leptin, which tells us that we're full, right? So you can see how if we don't have enough ghrelin, we're going to not be full, right? So we're going to have a higher appetite. And this is where the processed foods and the type of foods that we're eating matter so much. And we're going to touch more on that after, but I want to kind of help you start connecting these dots a little bit as we're kind of going through this, giving some examples. So it makes sense because the sciencey stuff can be overwhelming sometimes. So hopefully that helps connect the dots a bit. So now those are the two main hunger hormones that most people talk about. Next, we're going to talk about estrogen because people don't realize how much estrogen can impact your appetite as well.
Absolutely. And I heard a fantastic term for this on a podcast the other day. They called it the menopause munchies. And they were talking about how when our estrogen starts to decline, as it does through perimenopause and menopause, we can start to experience those changes in our hunger hormones. So estrogen is often thought of as being strictly a sex hormone, but it actually plays so many roles in the body, like in the immune system, the skeletal system, and the vascular system. We have estrogen receptors everywhere on our body. That is why symptoms like itchy ears can be part of perimenopause and menopause, because we actually have estrogen receptors on our skin, in our ears, and all over the rest of our body. When our estrogen is high, as it typically is, specifically during the first half of our cycle in our reproductive years, it is thought to play a role in regulating appetite because we have estrogen receptors in the feeding center of our brain. So as it declines, we can start to see increases in hunger. When estrogen is low, like in perimenopause and menopause, it can affect body weight and body fat. This can often cause central obesity, so that weight gain around the middle. With this body composition change, we are left with more visceral fat. This is the fat that sits in and around our internal organs. What's interesting about visceral fat is that it is actually more metabolically active than any of the other types of fat that we have in our body. And they can then play a role affecting our hunger and our satiety. So estrogen can play a huge role because we have so many estrogen receptors in our brain, especially in that feeding center of our brain where those messages are being sent to tell us if we are hungry or if we are full. Now, Steph is going to talk about GLP-1, which I'm sure you are all familiar with now.
Yes. So we actually have a guide on how to improve your GLP-1 production naturally in your body in our Facebook group. It is an ebook, actually. It is only available in our Facebook community. So if you want a copy of that, make sure you head there. The link to be able to join the Facebook community is in the show notes. There are over 22,000 women in that community, all struggling with the same things, all learning, getting access to hundreds of webinars, hundreds of resources, like some guides, like these exclusive ebooks. So if you want a copy of that, make sure you head there. Just wanted to put that caveat in there because GLP-1s are a big thing right now, right? So it's something we talk about a lot, but it is something that your body is supposed to produce on its own, believe it or not. So that's probably why it sounds so familiar. GLP-1s, right? It's everywhere. You know, it's the Ozempics, it's those weight loss drugs, it's everywhere. And GLP-1 is produced and secreted by cells that are found in your intestines when food enters the body. It stimulates them, and then it helps you with keeping your blood sugar levels stable. And it also helps make you feel full. So we all know that GLP-1s are used with diabetics, right, to help with their blood sugar control. And we know that it also helps with your appetite. It also slows down how quickly your stomach empties of food. So it tells your body that, hey, we're full. We need to stop eating. We're good, right? So we know that if you have things like chronic inflammatory diseases, or just more inflammation in your body in general, right? Which unfortunately, when estrogen goes down, that is a very pro-inflammatory state. Our body's naturally going to have more inflammation when estrogen drops. Or we have periods of increasing foods that cause you to be inflamed, like alcohol. So the wine that you're having at nighttime, not so great, right? And that's not me telling you not to drink. It's just be aware of what the repercussions are, and then you get to make choices based on that, but then you got to accept the responsibility and the consequences of that, right? So there's that. If we're having highly processed foods, right? Even some protein bars and protein powders for some women, we want to see you eating mostly whole foods, because I see this all the time when women are eating a lot of protein bars, a lot of the keto Pop-Tarts and the protein muffins and the low carb, high protein wraps and the carbonate breads and things like that. There's so many artificial sugars and there's so many artificial fibers and things like that actually cause a lot of inflammation or slow down digestion for you, which can then cause issues in the intestinal walls, making it so GLP-1 isn't produced as much. So that is something to be aware of. And so unfortunately for most women during perimenopause and menopause, when estrogen goes down and we see more inflammation, we're going to see that natural GLP-1 production decrease, which sucks because it helps keep you full and it helps your blood sugar control, which also gets worse when estrogen goes down. So this is like a double whammy, right? The other thing that really helps release and stimulate the production of GLP-1 in your gut is going to be protein. So another reason that you should be having your protein, right? Leafy greens, high fiber foods. These are all things that are going to help improve the GLP-1 production, as well as making sure you're having pre and probiotic type foods in your diet regularly, because that helps diversify your microbiome, keep your gut nice and healthy, because if that gut lining isn't good and you're dealing with leaky gut and things like that, GLP-1 production is going to decrease. So that's another one that unfortunately is most likely changing for you during perimenopause and menopause. And we need to improve natural production of that and understand how hormones play into that as well.
Yes. So the next one we're going to talk about is one called Neuropeptide Y. NPY is a hormone that is produced by cells in your brain and nervous system. Their job is to stimulate appetite and decrease our energy expenditure in response to things like fasting and stress. Neuropeptide Y is active in fat tissue, and research is actually suggesting that it may increase fat storage. What it does is that it acts on that hypothalamus, that area of our brain again. And research is also suggesting that it plays a really important role in the control of our food intake. It increases our food intake and also reduces fear and anxiety. So it plays a number of interesting roles in our brain. So to summarize that, it's a hormone that is produced in the cells in our brain and our nervous system. And its job is to increase our appetite and to bring down our energy expenditure as a way to keep us safe if it's expecting something like fasting or a high period of stress.
Yeah, so this is where, like, if you are stressed or you are fasting or both, which most women we talk to are stressed, are go, are living a fast-paced lifestyle, are under eating, they're fasting, they're skipping meals, that is going to then bring energy down, which a lot of women struggle with during perimenopause and menopause. That's probably the number one complaint we hear, along with belly fat. And then it's going to increase your appetite. You might be like, well, I'm not that hungry. Yeah, that's also you running on stress hormones. So you need to understand how these things play into effect overall. So this is where fasting and eating too little and being go all the time and skipping meals is actually working against you. So the next one is CCK. Chelsea, I don't even know how to pronounce this one. I don't know why.
I don't know where they come up with these names. It's cholecystokinin.
Right? Cholecystokinin. I'm like, who actually names these things?
I don't know. I wish they'd make it a little easier on us, though.
Right. I'm just like, the concepts people come up with, I'm like, great, awesome, love this, but like, why? Like, it doesn't make understanding science any easier. Okay, so CCK is a fullness hormone produced in the cells of our gut after a meal. Okay, so obviously you eat, you start to feel full. This is something that CCK will tell you. They are still doing a lot of research to understand the full role of CCKs, as you can imagine. This stuff is very complex. It's taking time. But at this time, moment in time, from the day we're recording this, it appears that CCK regulates short-term control of food intake by acting as one of our satiety signals of telling us that we're satisfied and full. It also plays important roles in our energy production, protein synthesis, so being able to, build muscle, very important. We know during perimenopause and menopause, right? So we want to make sure we have adequate amounts of this, as well as your digestion. It also increases the release of leptin, which we said was good, right? When leptin is high, it's going to tell us that, okay, we are allowed to burn body fat. We're not in this crazy state. We're full, we're happy, we're fed. That's great, right? If we have large doses of CCK, though, it can cause symptoms like stomach cramping and nausea that can presumably decrease food intake. So could perhaps maybe be where we're having, a little too much of those potato chips. Maybe we're having a little too much of whatever, right? Which can presumably then like decrease your food intake because you feel like crap. And if your tummy hurts, you're usually not eating more, right? And honestly, this probably has a little bit to do with what happened last night. Last night is the first night in a long time that I actually had some chips. And I haven't like really been doing that. TMI, like, did not have good digestion, was going to the bathroom, not great. Tummy was like cramping, not feeling great last night. Maybe this is it. Maybe my body was like, no, Steph, we just don't do this anymore. You went a little too far. A few chips, fine. Big bowl, probably not, So maybe not. Who knows? Body's complex.
Absolutely. We were in the States this weekend, and so like eating out a lot, and it was the same thing. I came home yesterday morning and had my normal breakfast, and I was starving by like 10 o'clock, which isn't normal for me. So it was like, obviously the types of food I was eating was impacting my hunger and fullness cue in my body. Okay, we're going to dive into another one. And this one is called Peptide YY. This is another hormone that actually acts to decrease our appetite. It is released after we eat, and it circulates in the blood and works by binding to the receptors in our brain. So when that PPY, or peptide YY, is in our brain, it goes and attaches to the receptors that we have in our brain. And its job is once those receptors have binded, it then decreases our appetite and helps to promote that feeling of fullness after we eat. When we have low levels of PPY, or PYY, oh my goodness, peptide YY, it can lead to greater appetite and overeating.
Yeah, it's almost like a stop signal. Like it puts like I almost think of it as like plugging the hole. It's like, okay, you're done. We covered it up. You're good. Great. The next one of my favorites, obviously, is cortisol. Y'all know that it was going to show up in here as if I've ever had a podcast without muttering those words. That's never going to happen. It's always going to be here, right? So as we know, cortisol is a stress hormone. It is produced in our adrenal glands, and stress can cause you to eat more. Shocking, right? When we are stressed out, this is typically when we're reaching for those sugary things, right? And it's going to cause you to eat more. And there's research that links high cortisol with impulsive snacking. So when you are like, hey, I don't know why I can't get my snacking under control. I just feel like I'm just doing it mindlessly. Next thing I know, there I am. Or you're driving and you see the Dairy Queen or the McDonald's or wherever, and you're like, oh, I'm just going to dip in real quick. Cortisol, baby, all day, all the time. This is us, right? So this is where also in conjunction with that, you have dopamine, which is one of our happy hormones, right? And it's released when we eat. So many people crave sweet foods when they are stressed because that sugar is going to provide that temporary mood boost. But we know after that mood boost, you're back to feeling not so great. Your cortisol is still high. You're still stressed out. You're still not dealing with the true issue at hand. And this cycle just keeps going and going and going. You might be like, well, when I'm stressed, Steph, I don't eat. I just keep going. I'm fine. I'm not hungry in the morning. I don't eat during lunch. But then I get home and it's like, boom, so stressed. And it's like, yeah, because when your cortisol is high, your body's going to break down muscle mass for energy, bring it to your liver, turns it into sugar, dumps it into your bloodstream. And that's how you're surviving. And then when your body kind of gets that time to like, okay, that stress is done. Your body's like, we need to eat now because like, we're obviously going to do this again because Stacy over here, this is our cycle. So we better load up and prepare for what inevitably is tomorrow because we know we're having coffee on an empty stomach. We know we're not having breakfast. We don't know if we're having lunch. We don't know how big that lunch is going to be, right? So these are all things that you need to think about.
Okay, so now we're going to dive into insulin. Insulin is a hormone that is released by our pancreas. It is involved in the regulation of our blood sugar levels because its job is to help to shuttle the sugars that we are eating, so our carbohydrates, into our cells. When we eat carbohydrates, doesn't matter if they're simple carbohydrates or complex carbohydrates, they are broken down to glucose. That glucose makes its way into the bloodstream. Once there, insulin is released and allows that blood glucose to enter into the muscle and our liver cells. This glucose is either used for energy by the cells or converted into fat for long-term storage. We also store a certain amount of glucose in our liver and our muscles in a form called glycogen. If we have excess glucose levels, it can be caused by eating more calories than the body requires. And if the cells fail to take the glucose from the blood, so if for whatever reason that glucose cannot make its way into the cells where it's used for energy, the body will then store it as fat.
And this is what we call insulin resistance, which we will touch on later.
Yes, we will.
But yes, keep that caveat in. But I always like to think of insulin as like the Uber Eats driver, you know, like sugar gets released into the bloodstream. That's like you made an order. They contact Uber Eats and they're like, hey, we got a delivery. It's coming. So it's almost like the sugar in your bloodstream is the food getting cooked or whatever. Uber Eats goes and picks up the food, takes it to your cells, knocks on the door, asks for the code, delivers the sugar. Like that's how I kind of like to talk about it. So remember that analogy for later because we're gonna bring this full circle for you. So to recap all of those, we can see that there are a huge number of things that are going to impact our body in terms of when we feel hungry, why we feel hungry, are we full, are we satisfied? And those hormones are going to be leptin, ghrelin, estrogen, cortisol, insulin, CCK, and then we have some neuropeptides that are acting on the brain that can impact whether we feel full, whether we feel hungry. So now you kind of have an understanding of like, wow, there's a lot of different things and like they all impact stuff differently, but they also impact each other, right? We talked about cortisol and like blood sugar, and there's insulin. We talked about leptin and ghrelin having a relationship there and some other ones, right? So you can see how we need to really understand how to work with our body and these hormones to set you up for success. So now we're going to talk about what can go wrong with hunger hormones, because I'm sure you are all like, I'm either hungry all the time, I'm never hungry, I'm struggling with binging, I'm overeating, I'm struggling with energy crashes, right? So we're going to talk about what can go wrong, and then we're going to tell you how to fix it so that this becomes a little bit more happy at the end here for you. So Chelsea's going to kick it off with leptin first.
Yes. So remember, leptin is our fullness hormone. Its job is to send messages to the brain, letting us know that we're full. When or if we have leptin resistance, this is something that is interrupting the signals to the brain, right? So that message that we're full is no longer making its way to the brain. And this then causes a malfunction in how leptin works in suppressing hunger. So when we look at leptin working correctly, what happens is a message gets sent to the brain that says, hey, we're full, we're all done, you can stop eating now. However, when someone is experiencing leptin resistance, the brain becomes less sensitive to leptin. So despite having high levels of leptin, because our body sent out that message that we're full, the message to your hypothalamus that your body has had enough doesn't get delivered. And so what your body does is it's like, okay, that message isn't getting there. We need to then create more leptin so that we can get that message to the brain. What this does, though, is that it contributes to further fat gain instead of fat loss. We still don't fully understand the reason behind leptin resistance, but research does suggest that it is related to inflammation and possibly even gene mutations in the body, right? We know peri-menopause and menopause an inflammatory state, so we can be more likely to experience things like leptin resistance during this time. When we're trying to understand leptin resistance, we can kind of imagine it as like a thermostat in our body, right? It's meant to keep the room at a certain temperature. When it works properly, it adjusts the heating and cooling as needed. However, in leptin resistance, our thermostat is broken. So the room, or our body, keeps heating up, meaning storing fat, but that thermostat, our brain, doesn't sense it. So it never turns off the heat, leading to more fat storage and increased hunger.
Yes, so some of the common signs that we see with like leptin resistance is like, is it difficult for you to lose weight, right? And there can be like a ton of reasons for that. So I'll let Chelsea kind of like list this off, that what the things are that are common signs that are making it more challenging for you to be able to lose weight, particularly in perimenopause and menopause.
And you'll notice that a number of these are going to tie into things like symptoms that we have in perimenopause and menopause and other hormone dysregulations like cortisol. So, as Stephanie was saying, is it difficult for you to lose weight, right? Are you not seeing results even when you do lose some weight? So are you not seeing those body composition changes when there is some weight loss? Are you holding all of your weight in your midsection no matter what you do? Are you having a really hard time keeping that weight off? Are you feeling constantly hungry? Are you craving sugary foods? And do you get hangry if you don't get your fix? Are you frequently stressed? Do you have high triglycerides? And are you experiencing high blood pressure, which we know is another common symptom of perimenopause and menopause? So leptin resistance is one of the ways that we can have those dysregulated hunger and satiety hormones. And Steph is going to dive into insulin resistance.
Yeah, so insulin resistance, just like when your body stops responding to the leptin levels to tell you that you're full with leptin resistance, insulin resistance is when your body doesn't listen to the signal from insulin anymore. So insulin levels start to rise, just like your leptin levels started to rise. So when this happens, your circulating blood sugar remains high because your body is, the blood sugar stays high. So your body's like, we need more insulin to, more Uber Eats guys to make these deliveries for us. However, It's like your Uber Eats guys are knocking on the cell doors to deliver the sugar, and you're like, oh, I changed my mind, I don't want this. Just leave it. So then you have this accumulation of orders of like people trying to get in the doors, and like, you're not letting them in. So it accumulates. Uber Eats keeps like calling more delivery drivers. And now you can't do anything about it, right? Or it's almost like your body has cells as parking spaces. So each cell is a parking space. And then insulin is a car that's trying to park in that parking spot. And in a healthy system, there's tons of parking spots available. And you can easily find a parking spot at the grocery store, park, you're good to go. In insulin resistance, it's like Costco on a Saturday. The parking lot is crowded. Okay, spaces are blocked. People are parking like jerks. There are like shopping carts where they are not supposed to be. It is crowded and like you cannot park. So insulin cannot find a place to put the glucose. Your body cannot deliver that sugar from the Uber Eats driver. Okay, it just stays in the bloodstream. So it's like you're just still doing laps around the parking lot. And like you're not in a good mood. You're stressed out. This is not a good time. Same thing for your body. Not a good time. So some of the common signs of insulin resistance, again, are trouble losing weight, craving sweets after meals, having the sweets, but it's not relieving the craving. Like you're just not satisfied by the thing, right? Feeling tired after meals is a huge one. High blood pressure and high triglycerides, frequent thirst and urination. And there are some other things that can increase your risk of insulin resistance, like having a waistline over 35 inches in women, blood pressure that is higher than 130/80, a fasting glucose of 100, fasting triglycerides of over 150. And these things, it's like if sugar doesn't have anywhere to go, your body ends up storing it as fat, right? Like if you can't park in that spot, you find somewhere else to park. And unfortunately, the parking spots they find are in your fat cells, which is not what you want, right? Because then we know if like we have more fat cells, that's going to disrupt your estrogen levels. It's going to disrupt your leptin levels, right? There's all this signaling that happens when we have excess fat in our body, more inflammation. So these are things that we need to be aware of. And this does not mean cutting out your carbs. I'm going to caveat that right now. We are not cutting carbs with insulin resistance. We are paying attention to the types of carbs, when we're eating, how we're eating. Like potato, no one got insulin resistance from eating potatoes. No one got insulin resistance from eating strawberries. Okay. There are so many things that we need to help you fix, and like learn how to eat, what to eat, when to eat, choosing higher fiber foods, eating your protein first, eating your veggies first, all these things that we'll talk about. So with insulin resistance, we are not cutting out our carbs. Then cortisol is going to go up. And what happens when cortisol goes up? Takes our muscle, breaks it down to sugar in the liver, turns it into the bloodstream, which then is going to rise your insulin anyways. Okay. We see this in people who do keto all of the time. When they come and work with us, we have to work on increasing carbohydrates slowly because they are so freaking insulin resistant from never having carbohydrates. So important. Keep this in your brain for later. Again, we're going to bring things full circle like we always do. So now Chelsey is going to talk about what are the impacts and causes of imbalances in hunger hormones? Because this is very important to understand. Why does this matter? Aside from like, obviously like, okay, you're probably going to be eating more, right? Reaching for like sugary foods, but what are the impacts of this on your body and like what's actually causing these things?
It's funny when you were talking about like the parking lot, I got to thinking like it's almost as if like our bodies love homeostasis, right? Our bodies love keeping things as they are. So they don't like when our bloodstream is crowded with all of these things that are trying to make its way into the cell. So it's almost as if that fat storage, so our body choosing to store the glucose as fat, is like that overflow parking, right? It's like where you have to park and then you've got to walk like a kilometer into wherever you're going. So it's like that fat storage is that overflow parking that our body doesn't want to use, but it has to use if that insulin and glucose cannot get into our cells.
You know, it's almost like when you tell your kids to clean their room and you come and you're like, oh, it looks great. And then you like look under the bed, chaos, closet, garbage everywhere. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. Finding anywhere to store stuff that isn't where it's supposed to be, which is not good. Or you just have too much crap, to be honest, right? And maybe this is where you start like purging your closet because you're like, okay, I don't have anywhere to put my laundry anymore. This isn't working for me. Exact same thing in your body.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about what can impact or cause those imbalances in our hunger hormones. Number 1, crash dieting and fasting. When we spend a lot of time at a really low calorie intake or a really inconsistent calorie intake, so that's when we have days that are at like 2,500, and then we have days when we're at 1,200. This can really disrupt the balance of our hunger hormones. Leptin decreases, ghrelin increases, our insulin decreases, and cortisol increases, which can blunt leptin's effect. So we're not feeling as full and as satisfied from the meals that we're typically eating if we are constantly under eating or spending days like the weekend warriors, right? Where we'll like be super good all week long. And then all of a sudden the weekends come and we increase our calories by like 1,500 to 2,000 calories. So that type of lifestyle can really, really impact our hunger and satiety hormones and the signaling. The next thing, stress. We've already touched on this a little bit, so I'm not going to go into it crazily. We know that stress really impacts us, right? We know that when we are stressed, we're more likely to reach for those snacks because our body is looking for that hit to make us feel good. But when cortisol increases, we become more leptin resistant and more insulin resistant.
Yeah, so with the leptin resistance, you don't feel full, right? Your body's not getting that signal. Your brain does not get the memo of like, hey, we ate enough. So when stress increases, you're more likely to overeat. And then with insulin resistance, you're going to have more blood sugar issues, which is already a problem when estrogen goes down. If you have more inflammation in your body, that's already going to be a problem as well. If you're fasting, if you're under eating, so you can see how like the stress and the under eating or inconsistent calorie intake are going to go hand in hand and like really messing up your hunger hormones, resulting in fat storage. We know if you're leptin resistant, if you're insulin resistant, body's naturally going to want to take you into that overflow parking lot. Glucose is not getting parked where it's supposed to be, so it gets taken to fat cells instead. So the next one is lack of sleep. Oh my goodness, I tell this story all the time. I track my sleep. I still do. Having a baby, I really pay attention to my sleep because I know if my sleep is off, everything else is ruined. Like, I shouldn't say everything is ruined, but like it's more challenging. I need to pay more attention to my food choices and what I'm doing during the day because sleep impacts so many things in our body. It's insane. If I have less than 6.5 hours of sleep, I am eating on average 400 calories more a day, which is insane. So even if I'm having, let's say like 2 or 3 nights of worse sleep, that's like 800 to like 1,200 extra calories in a week. That's a lot. That is super a lot. And those food choices are not good food choices, right? Like your body is wanting that dopamine hit to make you feel better, to give you quick energy because you're exhausted, right? That's going to ruin your blood sugars. Then we're going to have more insulin resistance. And like the cycle just ends up continuing. So we also know that the reason this happens when you are deprived of sleep, you're not getting enough sleep or good quality sleep, like when you're having alcohol at nighttime, that decreases your quality of sleep. We know that your hormones like ghrelin and cortisol are going to increase. So you are going to be more hungry. You're going to be more stressed out. Leptin decreases, so you're not as full and satisfied, which makes it really, really hard on your body to maintain weight. Because you can imagine if you're not full, if you feel hungry, if you're stressed out, you're struggling with blood sugar crashes, like, yes, losing weight's going to be really freaking hard. Sleep. If you can improve your sleep, it is crazy how much quicker you will see changes in your body composition. And you will also feel better. When you are tired and grouchy, you don't want to have a salad, right? You want to go to McDonald's. You want to have something super sugary, super carby. You're not wanting to have protein, right? You don't want to have veggies. If you're tired and hungry, I don't want broccoli. No, I want like a Pop-Tart, right? So thoughts on that. The next one is hormonal changes. Our sex hormones play an essential role in the regulation of our appetite, our eating behaviors, and our metabolism, actually. So how our body can utilize the energy that we are consuming. And estrogen has been known to inhibit food intake, and progesterone and testosterone can stimulate appetite. right? So we know when those are disproportionate to each other, we're going to see that we're more hungry. We're going to be, wanting to indulge in things a little bit more, especially estrogen, because estrogen helps you feel satisfied as well. So like, this is where, again, you have the thing that you want and it just like doesn't hit properly. Like, oh, I really want McDonald's. You go have McDonald's and you're like, oh, I still want something else that this like really didn't do it for me. Hormones, people, hormones. And the last one is genetics and epigenetics. So Coach Chelsey and I did a whole podcast on genetics and how it can influence your ability to lose weight and inflammation, peri-menopause and menopause. So I highly recommend you go back and listen to that because we're not going to touch on that too much here. But there can be specific gene mutations that can impact how effectively leptin works in your body. So telling your brain that you are full. And then there are the field of epigenetics, which looks at how your environmental influences can affect gene expression. So I was actually listening to a podcast the other day where they were talking about this, where it's like you can be born with like genetic predispositions, right? Like your risk of developing something is higher because your parents or grandparents had that, right? But they look at like epigenetics, which is the environment that you're in, the nurture, what you have in your environment, what's available, what you eat, how you move, all those things. And you can be totally fine, right? So it's like genetics load the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. So if you are having like, sugary snacks all the time, you're not active, you have all those things in your house, so it's very tempting. Like toxins that you're exposed to, if you're eating out a lot, you're more likely to have a lot more BPAs and phthalates in your food because of all the plastics that they use to package and warm up in the freezing process and all those kinds of things can then trigger these genetic predispositions to like quote unquote turn on almost, if that makes sense. So not going to touch too much on that right now. Go back to the genetics podcast I did with Coach Chelsey and I. It'll blow your mind. That was one of my favorite podcasts for sure. I think it just like ties everything so good. We had some pretty wild analogies, so hopefully it makes sense to you because I just like spew whatever comes to my brain for an example, and hopefully it all makes sense. So that covers kind of how things are impacting our ability. The big one I want you to remember is the stress, the crash dieting, and the fasting, because those are the ones that are going to be the biggest things on your lack of sleep as well. But now, how do they change during perimenopause and menopause? That is the big question, right?
Yes. So one of the main changes that happens is that our brain, as we know, is full of estrogen receptors. We just talked about how there are some in the feeding center of our brain. As our estrogen starts to decline, our brains go through a bit of a rewiring process. This can impact the way our brains function, including our hunger cues, our mood, and an increase in negative emotions. These can all lead to overeating and choosing less nutrient-dense foods like our comfort foods because we know that in the past, they've helped us to feel better.
So the next one is changes in progesterone. I love progesterone. You guys, progesterone is thought of like our chill hormone. Progesterone is the hormone that I struggled with for a very long time because when I was in my 20s and like, kind of knew some of this stuff, but like not really. And plus you always think you're the exception to the rule. And I'm like, oh, I'm active. I work out. I eat like pretty good. No, you take a hormone Dutch test. And I was like, oh, I'm like in perimenopausal range. Sweet. This is not great to be in your 20s. Between like stress and birth control and like not eating enough food, over exercising, tanked things. This is why I had no chill. Progesterone is the hormone that makes you feel good. It makes you feel relaxed and grounded. Stress just like rolls off your back. You feel great. But it can also increase your appetite. So when progesterone levels drop, it can cause some pretty big metabolic changes that can lead to increased fat storage and cravings for less nutritious foods and for comfort foods as well, which like can explain why around your cycle, right, when we see some hormonal fluctuations, we see changes in our appetites and cravings and things like that as well.
The next one that we often experience is sleep struggles, right? This is one of the main struggles that we hear about from clients, is that they are really struggling with sleep. Whether it is the quality or the quantity of their sleep, changes in those can really impact and make a huge role in our hunger and satiety hormones, right? So we know, and Steph was just saying, like when you're tired, there is significant caloric increase in what you're eating, and the foods that you're choosing are not always the best. So really getting a handle on your sleep during menopause, and we love to help our clients with this using tons of different strategies, can be so beneficial in helping to regulate those hunger and satiety hormones.
Yeah, one of our favorite ways is through a bedtime snack, which people are like, eating before bed is the worst thing that you can do. I get that comment all the time when I post about this on socials. I'm like, no, it's not. Like, it's really, really not. If you're someone who struggles with waking up, if you're someone who struggles like with waking up at nighttime, if you're someone who struggles to fall asleep, having a snack before bed that is small, it's still like whole foods. You have some carbohydrates that are slow digesting paired with protein or fat to help stabilize your blood sugars. What that does is it brings cortisol down. It allows melatonin, your sleepy hormone, to come up so you can fall asleep more easy. And the fiber in your carbohydrate paired with that fat and protein is going to stabilize your blood sugars all through the night so that you are not seeing a blood sugar spike and drop and then having your cortisol jump up, which is what wakes you up. And a lot of people are like, well, if you don't eat before bed, your blood sugars aren't going to drop. I'm like, yes, they will. Especially if you're someone who struggles with blood sugar control, your body's not used to going that long without like the ups and downs, having food constantly in your system, which is why you're waking up. So this can make a huge difference for people. The next one is stress, of course. So what we can tolerate for stress completely changes during perimenopause and menopause. And this is where like people are, I'm not stressed. It's just regular, same stress as everybody else. It used to be a lot worse. Like I'm totally handling it fine. No, you're not. I always like to say it's that GIF, that picture of that dog sitting at a chair at a table where everything's on fire. And it's like, it's fine. Everything's fine. You are not fine. And you're like, well, nothing has changed. Like, I don't know why you would think I'm stressed now. And when your hormones decrease, particularly estrogen and progesterone, what you can tolerate for stress decreases. Before you could handle a 9 out of 10 before you start seeing cortisol jump up and affecting your hormone production, your thyroid levels, your blood sugar control, your gut health, your bloating, your inflammation, all of these things that you've been talking about. Before it would take a 9 out of 10 on the stress scale, before you would see things be negatively impacted. Now it's a 5 out of 10. And it's because estrogen declines. So before you had like this nice big dinner plate that you could handle this nice big heaping mound of stress, AKA food. Estrogen goes down and that dinner plate becomes more of like a side salad plate. And you're like, but I didn't change anything. Yeah, but internally, what you can handle has now decreased. You can't hold this mountain of food anymore. It's not possible. So then we see this overshoot in cortisol and these negative things that you're experiencing. So this is where you're like, I haven't changed anything. Your body has changed and what you can tolerate has changed. So therefore you need to change the things externally. And sometimes you can't remove stressors from your life, and that's fine. This is where you learn how to buffer stress through proper activity, lifestyle, sleep, the right food intake, which is very important. So this is where you need to understand this stuff, because then when our cortisol levels are high, it's going to impact our appetite, the food choices that we make, which is then going to like affect our blood sugars even more, which is something we already struggle during perimenopause and menopause. Plus we're already dealing with all these things, right? So it just gets worse. So this is where what you were doing before doesn't work anymore because you're different. Even though you don't think that you are, you are.
And this kind of ties into our next one too, right? So we know that in perimenopause and menopause, it puts us into more of an inflammatory state. Our estrogen is very, very protective in our body. And as that starts to decline, our bodies are like, hey, like we need something else that's quite protective. And often it turns to cortisol, because cortisol, while it gets a very, very bad rap, and when we have too much of it, it is definitely a problem. We do need some cortisol, and cortisol can, in the right amounts, be correct or like protective in our body. So that's often why we'll see those increases in cortisol during perimenopause and menopause, because again, our bodies are trying to create that homeostasis for themselves, but they have to change the way that they're doing it. So we need to change some of our lifestyle and daily habits to help to support that.
Exactly. The next one is increased risk of insulin resistance in perimenopause and menopause. I talk about this all of the time. When estrogen goes down, our bodies become less sensitive to insulin. This means our body all of a sudden just has less parking spots. Estrogen goes down, parking lot gets smaller. Okay. Again, does not mean we need to cut out carbohydrates, because carbohydrates help lower your cortisol, which is then going to help you improve your insulin resistance. Okay. It just means that we have to be far more intentional about the types of carbohydrates that we're using, the order in which we eat foods. You want to eat most of your protein and veggies first before having your carbohydrates. We want to, make sure we're choosing higher fiber foods, more whole foods, less processed items. Have your potatoes, have your rice, have your quinoa, have your oats, your fruits, your veggies, your whole grains, your beans, right? Those are all very helpful. But we need to know that if we are more insulin resistant, the messages to our brain that we have a really hard time getting through. And it can make it so much easier to overeat because there's a delay in things, right? Like we know that this happens. And then again, you have less parking spots, you go into overflow much quicker, right? So this is where we need to understand that we need to be far more intentional than we ever were before about the way and what we're eating, because it changes with our hormones. As much as it sucks to hear that, it is. We can't get away with, going the up and downs like we used to. It just doesn't work anymore.
So estrogen, that drama queen, when she's decreasing, we're also at a greater risk of losing muscle. As we mentioned earlier, muscle is actually one of the places that our body likes to store glucose, right? And our bodies, when we exercise after meals, can actually get glucose into our cells without the use of insulin. So the more muscle that we have on our frame, the more insulin sensitive we tend to be, meaning that our bodies respond better to that insulin, and it's easier for that glucose to get into our cells, where it's then used to create energy for us. Now, the final one that we're going to talk about today is that our gut during perimenopause and menopause goes through so many changes. There's actually research that shows that pre-menopause or in our reproductive years, we have a very distinctly female microbiome. Post-menopause, our microbiome is actually more like that of a man's. And it's because we lose a very specific part of our microbiome called the estrobolome. Now, when we're going through these changes, this can cause a really big disruption in our microbiome. And this can affect the production of hormones like ghrelin and leptin, as well as some of those other ones that we mentioned, like CCK earlier, that is actually produced in the gut, right? When this happens, it can really disrupt to those hunger and fullness cues that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and then with those changes in your gut microbiome, we know that it's going to cause some stress on the intestinal walls, which is also going to decrease your GLP-1 natural production. So you're going to be struggling with blood sugar even more than you already are during perimenopause and menopause. You're going to be struggling with your hunger and fullness cues even more, right? There's so many things that when estrogen goes down, you have this okay, it affects this thing, but then that affects this, impacting your blood sugar, impacting your leptin, impacting your ghrelin. So everything goes together, but we keep tossing on all these freaking Band-Aids of oh, it's the blood sugar thing, so we need to do this. But it's okay, but why is the blood sugar high? We've got the changes in your gut. We've got the changes with your sleep. All these things are influencing your blood sugar more than you realize. But we just start trying to find all these quick fixes instead of digging down deep, why, to address that root cause. So how can we support a good balance of hunger hormones? How can we, we just listed off all the hormones that get messed up, everything that ruins your appetite, right? All the negatives, the blood sugar, the leptin that are causing you to gain weight, right? And struggle to get rid of it, causing fat storage. We talked about all these things. So let's talk about how you can actually, start reversing these things. Let's start moving the coin forward in the right direction. So the first one is going to be eat your complex carbs. Yes, this is step number 1. Carbohydrates, you guys, which people are I don't know if I trust you. Let me tell you. Complex carbs are the starches. Starches are not bad for you. Starches and fiber that are found in foods like fruits and veggies, beans, whole grains. You can have whole grains. Holy moly. So food sources of complex carbs are going to be your whole grains like your quinoa, your oats, your brown rice, buckwheat, pulses like beans and lentils. Our starchy carbs, sweet potatoes, regular potatoes. So a regular potato will actually spike your blood sugar less than a sweet potato. I don't know why everyone thinks sweet potato is so much better. You actually have a higher blood sugar response from sweet potatoes, just so you know. Butternut squash, beets. We have all different kinds of squashes, right? Like all those would fall into that category. We have parsnips, your fruits, like your blueberries, your apples, your oranges, bananas. I had a woman tell me that her coach told her she couldn't have more than half a banana a day because blood sugar. And I was like, get a new coach. Peaches, mangoes, strawberries, right? All of those things are so good for you. So good for you. The thing that you want to avoid or, try and limit are going to be the high amounts of added sugars. So this is something that I want you to be aware of in terms of like the highly processed foods, right? This is what you need to pay attention to. Like for example, like the naked juices, the green juices, that brand, terrible. If you look at the sugar content in those, it's insane. It's a green juice, but the first 4 ingredients are like fake fruit juices, fake fruit juices, all added sugars, not good. So you need to pay attention to those things. Like that's what's going to make a huge difference. 1 ingredient, carbohydrates, amazing. The fewer ingredients, the better. The less processed, the better. Whole grains, amazing. And the next one is like, okay, carbohydrates, no matter what, are going to raise your blood sugars a bit, right? But you want to have balanced snacks. You are never having carbohydrates on its own. Never, ever, not even fruit. Okay, we all like reach for an orange or an apple. Eat something with it. So always make sure that your meals and your snacks are balanced. It has protein, carbs, healthy fats, fiber. So let's say you want an apple, sweet. Maybe you have a little bit of yogurt before. Have a piece of cheese first. Maybe you have a turkey pepperoni stick first. Maybe you're having it with some peanut butter, right? You're always pairing it with something. If you're having your meals, have part of your steak first before dipping into those mashed potatoes. That's what I did the other night. Delicious. Right? Maybe it's like, you want to have, I don't know, or even nuts. Nuts are a good thing to have before too. You want to have pasta. Okay, fine. That's great. Have a side salad and eat some of the chicken that comes to your pasta first before dipping into your pasta. Not a big deal. Like understanding that it's the whole like effect of the meal on your blood sugar that matters more than like, oh, I have this one carb in here and that's going to be bad. No, the whole structure of the meal and the order you eat it in is going to make a far bigger difference on your blood sugar control and your hunger and fullness cues. Because if your blood sugar is constantly tanking all the time, you're going to have cravings all the time. So by doing this, it's going to help you. It also empties out of your stomach more slowly, which allows your stomach to stretch. So then you have leptin receptors being activated sooner, telling you that you're full, right? So all these things, there's a reason that we tell you this. It's not just blood sugar. It's also the GLP-1s. It's also going to affect your leptin. It's going to help with your ghrelin. All of these things are going to influence to make it all work together. Okay. We just don't like go into like the nitty gritties of every single reason why you need to do that, because then people don't listen. Right. So hopefully this makes you understand a little bit more about like why we stress carbs, why we stress fiber, and the pairings and order of eating food. Like this will move the needle so much for you if you can do this consistently. It's a challenge that we're doing with our clients right now as we speak. We're focusing on order of food, like with everyone, because it is so, so important.
Okay, the next one we have exercise. Exercise can help to moderate our hunger hormones. They actually work to reduce leptin. And it is also a great way to help with glucose uptake into our muscle cells. When the muscle cells contract during activity, your cells can take up glucose and use it for energy without insulin. So whether insulin is available or not, right? So this is often why people will suggest taking that 10 to 15 minute walk after a meal, because it helps to get that glucose shuttled into your muscle cells without having super, super high insulin, a huge amount of insulin released. The next thing is that we often want to see higher protein diets. So not only does protein help to keep us feeling full for longer, it also increases leptin because it helps with those stretch receptors in our stomach, right? It also helps to promote satiety because it increases hormones like CCK, Peptide YY, and GLP-1.
The next one, no fasting, which everyone's like, what? And I'm like, if your fasting was going to work, it would have worked by now. If it's not working and you feel like garbage, maybe it's a problem. I don't know. Just a crazy idea I'm throwing out here. But we know that fasting is going to negatively impact your leptin. It's going to negatively impact your ghrelin levels, right? So you're not going to be feeling as full. You're going to feel more hungry more often. We also know it's going to raise your cortisol, which is going to negatively impact your blood sugar control, right? Fasting is supposed to be meant to be used in very specific cases for short periods of time. This is probably the most abused form of like quote unquote dieting that we see because people don't realize the impact it has. It's like, okay, yeah, it helps you with like calorie reduction because you're eating in a smaller window. But I mean, if I'm not having breakfast and I'm trying to get 120 grams of protein in like an 8-hour window, I mean, I've got to do like 50 grams at each meal, and eating 50 grams of protein in a small period of time from mostly whole foods. Oh my gosh, you're going to be so full. You're going to be so uncomfortable. Like because it's very filling, right? So this is where having your breakfast is great for your hormonal levels, great for your cortisol, great for your blood sugar control, great for actually hitting your targets, right? Improving your energy, all these benefits. So no more fasting. It really messes up your hunger cues and hormones. We don't want to do that anymore. And the next one actually is very interesting. Vitamin D. If you are deficient in vitamin D, it is often associated with more hunger and more cravings. How crazy is that? Crazy. I don't know.
And if you live in North America like us and are about to head into the worst part of the year, which is fall and winter, in my opinion, it might not be a terrible idea to supplement with vitamin D, but we suggest getting your blood test or like a blood work done first, just to make sure that it is something that your body actually needs. Okay, sleep. We've already talked about this one a little bit, and we know that it is a huge struggle during perimenopause and menopause. So using strategies to improve sleep, like that bedtime snack, can really help to improve your sleep quality and can be so beneficial in helping to improve your insulin sensitivity. Diet is our next one. We want to make sure that we are focused on a well-balanced diet. This should include a variety of complex carbs, fiber, protein, and healthy fats so that we can assist your body in becoming more insulin sensitive.
And that's also going to help bring inflammation down too, which is like super important because inflammation really drives up a lot of the issues that we see as well. The next one is eating enough food. I don't know how many times I'm going to tell you guys this. If we are not eating enough food, cortisol is going to go up. When cortisol goes up, everything goes to crap. Let's be honest. Okay. So we need to make sure that we are eating enough food because that is a stress on the body. And what you were eating before, which was okay, might not be good for you now that your hormones have changed, right? That dinner plate analogy, it got smaller. We can't handle as much anymore. So we need to eat at the right times, the right order, the right amount, the right kinds of foods to be able to set you up for success this way, right? If you have no idea how much food you should be eating, we calculate this for women for free, literally every single day. The best way to do this is to book a consultation call. You can message me, but my DMs get very full very quickly. So if you're doing it that way, just expect to like 5 business days to hear a response as I catch up, because there is a lot of you, which is wonderful. And I love that. And I love when you message me. But if you want to get things done quicker and in real time and like be able to answer all the questions that you have, like book a call. It's the easiest thing. The link for that will be in the show notes for you as well. So eating enough food, super important. I think we also mentioned this on every single podcast I've ever done, literally ever. The next one is omega-3 fatty acids. They can improve insulin sensitivity, specifically for people who already have metabolic conditions like diabetes. So this is increasing your omega-3 fatty acid intake from, having salmon, having some flax seeds, right? Those are all important. Supplementing, honestly, is what I recommend because we do not get enough of them in our diet. It's anti-inflammatory, which is also very important, especially as estrogen declines. And then, of course, one of the biggest ones is going to be stress management, bringing those cortisol levels back to where they're supposed to be. Because when we have that dysfunction or dysregulation or the signaling isn't good in that stress response system, our HPA axis, it can really affect your appetite. Among everything else, like your hormone levels, your blood sugar control, your thyroid function, your gut health, your inflammation, your ability to put on and build muscle mass, your liver health, actually, your mood, your energy, your ability to sleep, All these things are impacted. And it's a lot easier to see those things go south during perimenopause and menopause. So where might you actually be able to make some improvements in this, right? Like what can you remove to make things less stressful? And what are some ways that you can intentionally add things to make things less stressful? Because like a lot of people think it has to be like, oh, I got to book a massage and I got to meditate and do a gratitude journal and I have to burn incense and have this like, so like the hot and cold showers, all those things. It can be 5 minutes. 5 minutes of putting your feet up to bring those cortisol levels down. It can be 5 minutes of coloring, knitting, crocheting, reading a book. Maybe you're just having tea, sitting outside, like very small commitment things that are self-care to bring those stress levels down. It doesn't have to be this huge routine or a huge time commitment or expensive. So as you can see, there are so many factors that come into play when it comes to your hunger, your hormones telling you that you're full, and why fat loss and weight loss resistance are so much more than just eat less, move more. I hate that. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it because it is not helpful. It is very vague and it doesn't tell you anything. Because as you can see, the order that you're eating food in, the types of foods that you're eating, when you're eating, how you're eating it, consistent like intake up and down, like all of these things are going to impact everything in your body. So it's so much more complicated than that. That's not helpful, right? So if you need help figuring out what things look like for you, again, we always calculate your calories, how to get to where you need to be, give you a general outline specific to you from what we talk about on our call. If you message me, it's not just going to be your age, height, weight, activity level, right? I'm going to ask you a multitude of questions. You're going to answer, and then I'm probably going to ask you more. It's not a short process in figuring out where you need to be because what you need and how to move forward is going to depend on so many things from your history, plus where you are right now, what your goals are, what your symptoms are. So it's a lot more than that. Okay. So that's just something to be aware of. If you want this done, just message us, book a consultation call. We're always happy to help with that. I hope this was helpful. I want to make like a cheat sheet probably to put in our Facebook community as well. Again, all these things, we have so many resources, webinars, little videos, ebooks, guides in there. You can join there as well. Coach Chelsey, thank you so much for being on and bringing this topic for us. And we will all talk to you soon. Bye.